Good morning. Good morning. Welcome. I'm Pam Schumann, and I'm a worship associate here at Horizon UU Church. We're so glad to have you here with us today, whether you're joining us in person or virtually. Hi, virtual people. And whether you're here for the first time or, like me, whether you've been here for longer than you can remember. Here at Horizon, we welcome people of all faiths and of no faith in particular. Whoever you are, wherever you are on your journey, you are welcome among us. And let's see, you do all of them?
I'm Meredith Barber. I'm the minister here at Horizon, and I am joining my fellow millennial ministers in preaching from an iPad for the first time this morning. So anyway, just thought people might like to know that, and bear with me if I have any mess ups. So our call to worship this morning comes from the writings of the Reverend Leslie Takahashi. She writes, "To worship means to consider that which has worth. Today we consider with gratitude the many gifts of this community, the opportunity to be affirmed in who we are and to offer that affirmation to others, the chance to stand up together to help remake the world in the ideal of justice, the freedom to choose one's own path to truth and to learn from the travelogues of others, the space to expand one's own spirit and to reconnect after busy or humdrum weeks with the sustaining truths of one's life. Regular reminders that we must see our world through the lens of love. And the aspiration to consider all life as precious, for if all of it is made of stardust, how can it not be wondrous? So this morning, let's welcome all of these gifts with gratitude, for they have been paid for with many currencies. The blood of the martyrs who died so that we can be free in our religion. The sweat of those who persisted in justice's name against hostility and adversity. The tears of those who struggled to build better lives for those in this life. The questions of our children as they understand the world anew and offer their understanding to us as a fresh lens. The laughter and joy of those giddy with the embrace of community. The dollars and cents of those who gave what they could and then stretched a little more. The infinite small acts of service that make the parts greater than the whole, done by those who knew themselves in sympathy with our purposes. So today we consider with gratitude and humility what it means to pay forward what has been paid forward for us. And now, with all this, let us enter into worship with gladness in our hearts.
The words for our chalice lighting today come from Rachel Hayes, "To bear love into this world." We light our chalice this morning with our hearts turned to the work of our congregation. We have inherited this institution from generations of people who believed in the power of human beings to bear love into the world. We carry this tradition for those who find comfort, inspiration, and joy within its real and virtual spaces. We tend the spark of imagination and hope for the world to come. And now, as you are able to follow along with our affirmation, which is also printed in your order of service, love is the doctrine of our church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humanity in harmony with the earth. Thus do we covenant together.
Right. So please rise, either in body or in spirit, and join in singing our opening hymn, Bright Morning Stars. It's number 357 in the gray hymnal.
Bright morning stars are rising. Bright morning stars are rising. Bright morning stars are rising. Day is a-breaking in my soul. Oh, where are our dear mothers? Oh, where are our dear mothers? Oh, where are our dear mothers? Day is a-breaking in my soul. They are sowing seeds of gladness. They are sowing seeds of gladness. They are sowing seeds of gladness. Days of breaking in my soul. Oh, where are our dear fathers? Oh, where are our dear fathers? Oh, where are our dear fathers? Day is a-breaking in my soul.
Please be seated. So we come now to the time in our service where we share our gifts to support the ministries of this church. Our gifts will now be joyfully given and received.
Yayoi no soto wa miwatasu kagiri kasumi ka kumo ka nihoi so izuru Isaiah, cherry blooms, cherry blooms, cherry blooms are everywhere, like a cloud from out the sky. Mists of blossoms fill the air. Cherries, cherries blossoming. Come and see, come and see. Let all now see and sing.
Good morning. Hi, I'm Lauren Daniel, the Director of Lifespan Religious Education. I'm really glad to be with you this morning. We'll be doing a time for all ages, and thank you so much for my audience. I recruited a few younger members of the congregation, so I felt like I could be speaking to all ages, at home and here in the sanctuary. So today I have a story for you. It's called The Magic Flowers, and it's by Jules Hamarillo. Once upon a time, in a place not too far from here, there was a large meadow where it hadn't rained for a very long time. Animals were getting worried that their flowers might never bloom again, and their fields would never be as beautiful as they dreamed they could be. A rabbit was hopping through the fields, very worried about this, when she noticed a kindly older woman walking towards her carrying a bouquet of many different bunches of flowers. The rabbit stopped and asked about the beautiful flowers she was carrying. She looked at the rabbit and smiled. And then the woman said, "These, my dear rabbit, are very special flowers. Some might even say magical." She looked down at the rabbit and smiled once again. "If you put these flowers to good use, you may discover the magic they hold." And she handed the rabbit the entire bag of flowers. The rabbit went on her way, and she became really hungry. She wanted to take nibbles of those delicious-looking flowers, but thought, maybe there's something better they could be used for. On her way home, the rabbit met a lamb, and who also looked very worried about the dried-up meadow. She stopped to talk to her friend the lamb and told the lamb about the woman she had met in the bouquet of flowers. Rabbit also remembered the lesson she learned about how important it is to share when you are able, so she gave one of the bouquets to the lamb, repeating the old woman's words to put the flowers to good use. The rabbit continued her way home, feeling both happy and hoping she had made the right choice to share those flowers. As she continued her hopping, the very same thing happened when she met the duck, the goat, and the old bluebird. Each time she hesitated, but knew in her heart that sharing the flowers and the words of the wise woman was the best way to put these flowers to use. When the rabbit arrived home, she had no bouquets left to show, just some plastic from that they were wrapped in. She told her family all about what had happened with the gifts, and her family was very proud of her choice to share. As they went inside the rabbit hole, they heard a rumble of thunder, and a great rain came to the meadow. And it rained, and it rained, and when the sun came out, they heard a knock on their door. The rabbit opened the door and saw the kind woman, and at first she was nervous and tried to explain how her flowers were gone now. But the woman interrupted and said, "Didn't I tell you that if you use them well, they'd almost be like magic? Well, look outside and see what your good choices have done." The rabbit peered out of her burrow to take a look, and as far as the eye could see, the whole meadow had turned into a wonderful bouquet of beautiful flowers and colors. And the rabbit felt so much joy that she had been part of the magic that brought happiness and beauty for so many. The end. If you're younger and you're in the audience, you may accompany me out the sanctuary now, and we're going to go ahead to the yellow classroom. Thank you.
Our first reading today is by Khalil Gibran, On Giving is the title. Then said a rich man, "Speak to us of giving." And he answered, "You give but little when you give of your possessions. It is when you give of yourself that you truly give. For what are your possessions but things you keep and guard for fear you may need them tomorrow? And tomorrow? What shall tomorrow bring to the overprudent dog burying bones in the trackless sand as he follows the pilgrims to the holy city? And what is fear of need but need itself? Is not dread of thirst when your well is full, the thirst that is unquenchable? There are those who give little of the much which they have, and they give it for recognition, and their hidden desire makes their gifts unwholesome. And there are those who have little and give it all. These are the believers in life and the bounty of life, and their coffer is never empty. There are those who give with joy, and that joy is their reward. And there are those who give with pain, and that pain is their baptism. And there are those who give and know not pain in giving, nor do they seek joy, nor give with mindfulness of virtue. They give as in the yonder valley the myrtle breathes its fragrance into space. Through the hands of such of these, God speaks, and from behind their eyes, he smiles upon the earth. It is well to give when asked, but it is better to give unasked, through understanding. And to the open-handed, the search for one who shall receive is joy greater than giving. And is there aught you would withhold? All you have shall someday be given.
We come now to the time in our worship service that we set aside for meditation and prayer. We'll share in a collective moment of silence, hear the joys and sorrows of our community, listen to a spoken prayer, and then join together in singing our responsive hymn, Spirit of Life. So I invite you to join me now in a moment of silence. This morning we have a remembrance to share. We remember this morning Wendy Sue on this first anniversary of her passing. We also share in a joy. Yesterday, Elizabeth's son Tobin was married to his wife Deani, and I had the pleasure of officiating here in our sanctuary, so we celebrate with them. Loving God, Spirit of life, mystery in which we live and move and have our being, draw near to us this morning and hear our prayers. We give thanks this morning for the chance to put our faith in one another, in this community. We give thanks for the chance to be here, among people who either know us well or want to know us. Showing up this Sunday is a radical act in a culture of isolation and loneliness. Your presence here among us is holy. Great mystery, we wonder this morning about the injustices of our time. We rage, we cry, and we search for something we can do to make a change. Guide us toward community and remind us that through it all, we are not alone. In this uncertain world, it is a privilege to have a community like this one, and to give to it is a gift in and of itself. Remind us that we are entering the season now where we need to think about generations to come. What kind of church community do we want them to inherit? What kind of world do we want them to inherit? Help us to remember to let love be our guide in the questions we ask ourselves and each other, in our uncertainty about how to live and how to give, in our desire to show care for our community. Spirit of life, we also know that amidst the strain and pain of the world, we are imperfect people. We are people who sometimes try too hard to control what's not ours to control. We are people sometimes with short tempers, and we are people who might not always show our love and our care the way we'd like, even though it's always there. Help us to remember that with each morning dawn, we have the privilege to greet the day and to try again, to love one another. For all these things and those left unspoken in the silence of our hearts, we pray. Amen. I invite you to join me now in our responsive hymn, number 123, Spirit of Life. Please rise, either in body or in spirit.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Our second reading this morning is a favorite of mine. This is called The Seven of Pentacles by Marge Piercy. Under a sky the color of pea soup, she is looking at her work growing away there actively, thickly like grapevines or pole beans, as things grow in the real world, slowly enough. If you tend them properly, if you mulch, if you water, if you provide birds that eat insects a home and winter food, if the sun shines and you pick off caterpillars, if the praying mantis comes and the ladybugs and the bees, then the plants flourish, but at their own internal clock. Connections are made slowly. Sometimes they grow underground. You cannot always tell by looking what is happening. More than half the tree is spread out in the soil under your feet. Penetrate quietly as the earthworm that blows no trumpet. Fight persistently as the creeper that brings down the tree. Spread like the squash plant that overruns the garden. Gnaw in the dark and use the sun to make sugar. Weave real connections. Create real nodes. Build real houses. Live a life that can endure. Make love that is loving. Keep tangling and interweaving and taking more in, a thicket and bramble wilderness to the outside, but to us, interconnected with rabbit runs and burrows and lairs. Live as if you liked yourself, and it may happen. Reach out. Keep reaching out. Keep bringing in. This is how we are going to live for a long time. Here ends the reading. So far, if you're a regular here at Horizon, I think you know a little bit about me. That's kind of the goal right now, is that we get to know one another. And I view preaching as my chance to have an ongoing conversation with each one of you, one I hope you'll want to join me in. But one thing I'm not sure you all know about me is that a large part of what I guess I would call my ministerial formation occurred during my time as a volunteer at Heifer Ranch. I came to call it the ranch, somewhat reluctantly. At 22, I was watching a lot of friends enter the corporate world, and though I knew it wasn't quite right for me, a part of me was jealous. I wanted success as much as the next person, and at that age, success meant both financial stability and having a job that people around me would understand and respect. Not sure if I have that still, but we'll see. I had thought about being a teacher. I'd worked a lot with children and youth, but that wasn't quite it for me. It felt like there was something missing. I cared a lot more about people and relationships than teaching any subject matter. And I'd already felt the call to ministry at that age, but I was also so uncertain. How could I, knowing firsthand all that it would require of me, how could I make that commitment? My life at that time, as I think everyone's is at 22, was uncertain, and no matter what, it became clear that I would have to push myself beyond my comfort zone. So I chose to move back with my family to Arkansas in search of something new. I would both live and work at what I would come to call the ranch. And at that time, a part of me was still so shy. I didn't know if I was really cut out for that life of leading programs, living on a ranch with people I didn't know. Just didn't really seem like it was right for me. So I know a lot of you are familiar with the global villages they have there, but if you're not, Heifer Ranch used to be an educational facility affiliated with Heifer International, used to teach about hunger and poverty around the world. And I used to teach the program where kids, and sometimes adults, would spend the night in the global village. We'd divide them amongst places around the world like Tibet, Guatemala, Appalachia, Thailand, Zambia. Each country would get a little bit of food, some rice for some, eggs for another, oil for another country, and I'm sure you get the idea. Before we left the kids with their chaperones for the night, we'd be sure to remind them that there was enough food for everyone in the village that night. And then all of us volunteers would head back to our cabins, and we'd have a beer and watch the sunset and listen to screaming children. And the next day, we'd return, and we'd debrief with them about their night and ask the question, if there's enough for all, why don't all have enough? And I will say that not everyone got it, including some of the adults. I came to notice that Heifer is kind of a favorite of the bootstraps crowd, who would proudly let me know that they didn't believe in charity, but in self-sufficiency. But for so many, mostly the kids, it was an eye-opening moment regarding the way greed can work in the world. And of course, there are ways in which this analysis is simplistic. We certainly could have spent more time thinking and talking about systems of oppression that add more nuance to this question. But lately, I've been returning to it, almost like a mantra. If there's enough for all, why don't all have enough? Because I feel like this is currently playing out on a global scale as we watch another war waged for oil. We, and I use that in the global sense, have chosen not to shift direction and meaningfully invest in renewable energy, despite warning after warning about what might happen. And now it has come back to haunt us. I've been wondering, what is enough really? What would enough look like to the billionaires of our worlds? Truly, what would it mean for us to have enough money, enough stuff? And for all of us, how do we know that we are leaving enough behind for future generations? Will there ever be such a thing as enough? When I think about the concept of enough, of abundance, I gravitate toward the metaphor of trees and of garden, to things we plant. Because what we plant matters, not just for us, but for generations to come. There is a story in the Midrash of an old man observed planting a fig tree. When asked if he really expected to live long enough to consume the fruits of his labor, he replied, "I was born into a world flourishing with ready pleasures. My ancestors planted for me, and now I plant for my children. Now we plant for our children." I know that for many of us, this is true here at Horizon. I've heard from so many of you a similar story. I came to Horizon looking for a place for my children, to teach them about the world, to instill in them values like justice, equity, and compassion for others. But for so many of you too, this was just the beginning. You already knew about the kind of values you held, and that you wanted those values to guide your children's lives. But UU community provided a place to go deeper, to share the journey with others, some who might have similar stories and others whose journeys may be completely different. This is how we learn and how we grow. This is how we are going to live together for a long time. Marge Piercy is one of my favorite poets, and we heard earlier in her writing about the way that planting can be an act of faith. Connections are made slowly, she writes. I've returned again and again to this poem, teasing out the way planting is a metaphor for life. To plant is an act of faith, an act of trust. We cannot see what is taking place underground. We can't constantly check in and make sure everything is progressing the way we'd like. It requires us to give up quite a bit of control, to give it over to the larger force of the earth. Our anxiety has no bearing on the growing process. There are a few lines in a Mary Oliver poem called I Worried that speak so well to this feeling. She writes, I worried a lot. Will the garden grow? Will the rivers flow in the right direction? Will the earth turn as it was taught? And if not, how shall I correct it? We think we have so much more control over these things than we ever really do. Many of you are probably familiar with OWL, Our Whole Lives, the course that we UUs teach about the gift of our sexuality, that we encourage our children to take so that they can be equipped with the knowledge to make the right decisions for themselves. This is something we are particularly proud of, and to be honest, we should be. This is a ministry that saves people's lives, that arms our young people with information they may never get anywhere else for some, so that they can make informed decisions that impact their future, that affirms for so many that who they are and who they love is not shameful. So many religious professionals have dedicated their careers to OWL's creation and development over time. But as comfortable as some of us may be talking about sexuality, we are not always the same about money. And there are many reasons for this discomfort. For one thing, many of us were taught that to discuss money is not polite, that somehow acknowledging something we all have to deal with is not okay. And for another, it can be a source of stress and anxiety for so many of us. Maybe we think it's better to avoid or to keep it light. And though I understand this impulse, this is also a way of bypassing meaningful conversation, a refusal to be uncomfortable. Money, in the dominant American culture, can also be linked to our worth and can create shame. Some of us have been taught, or maybe subconsciously feel, that we are only as worthy as our paycheck, that if we are bad with money, that we are bad people. Some so-called experts even teach that it's immoral to have debt, completely disregarding systems of oppression that we know exist, shaming people for their circumstances. This approach feels so backwards in 2022. Giving and money can also be tied to some pretty bad theology, especially what's known as the prosperity gospel, the idea that if you have faith, the right kind of faith, that if you believe the right things, you'll be rewarded with material possessions and with good health. And those of us who understand that in life there will always be times of hardship and that eventually all of our health will fail, understand that this creates a pretty disastrous theological situation. Because if someone believes that they will always be rewarded and blessed for their faith, what happens to faith when the blessings stop? Where does that leave our faith when life gets hard? This is the water in which we all swim. But our work as UUs and our work at Horizon is to try to free ourselves and one another from a shame-based approach to caring for our community. To try to think of giving as an act of liberation. For, as Maya Angelou said, I have found that among its other benefits, giving liberates the soul of the giver. I think what Maya Angelou says is true. For us, as Unitarian Universalists, giving to this community is a part of membership. It's how we show that we care. It's part of our spirituality. It's acknowledging that we are a small part of a larger whole. We all give in different ways. You all, I'm sure, are incredibly familiar with the phrase time, talent, and treasure. We are a community made up of different people with different skills, different talents, and ideas, who each contribute different gifts to the larger whole. Things we could never have done alone become possible in a community like this one. For some of us, we choose to give with our time. I remember working in a church at the beginning of my time in seminary and hearing a woman on the board boldly name the truth of the matter. She said to the room full of us, "Look, some of you know me well and others of you don't, but I am a single mom, and I've been through a lot over the past few years, and this church has really been there for me. And I would love to give more, but I'm doing all I can right now. And so because of that, I choose to give with my time. I try to volunteer for leadership positions whenever I can, because this is how I want to serve the church. For still others of us, maybe we can't do all the things we might want to do for this community. Maybe we don't have much extra time to give, so we give with our treasure. The truth about all of this is that generosity begets generosity. In the words of children's writer Selena Yoon, when you give love, it grows. We will always be our children's primary teachers about faith and about life, whether we like it or not. Our children and our grandchildren are watching us. Our friends' children are watching us. Our nieces and nephews are watching us. The next generation is looking to us for answers. And I know that we want to teach them about a spirituality of abundance rather than to model scarcity. We want to teach them that together we will make enough, that we will come together as a community to help each other, that we will plan for their future, that we will take care of them, and we expect them to care for the next generation. This is how we are going to live together for a long time. We don't want them to always feel the fear of not having enough money or enough time or enough space. We don't want them to think of all the things they can't do. We don't want them to lose hope. Instead, we want them to dream about what might be possible. We talked last week about what faith can mean, about faith being something you give your heart to. Well, giving, tending our collective garden is another part of faith. It's giving your heart to each other and to the next generation. To believe, in this point in time, as we watch the costs of everyday living rise, that there is enough to go around is to be radical. And I will always ask you to be radical with me, for I believe that is how we move toward liberation. We can only get free together. In the words of the Reverend Dr. Michael Schuler, if you are proud of this church, become its advocate. If you are concerned for its future, share its message. If its values resonate deep within you, give it a measure of your devotion. This church cannot survive without your faith, your confidence, and your enthusiasm. Its destiny, the larger hope, rests in your hands. So as we think about what it means to be good stewards, good caregivers of our church, I am returning to those images of children, thinking about that question. If there's enough for all, why don't all have enough? And into my mind pops the image of the old man planting fig trees that he would never see bear fruit, planting and doing it in love, hoping that for his children and his children's children, the fruit would be enough. May it be so. Amen. I invite you now to rise, either in body or in spirit, and join in singing our closing hymn, The Fire of Commitment. It's number 1028 in the Teal hymnal.
From the light of days remembered burns a beacon bright and clear, guiding hands and hearts and spirits into faith set free from fear. When the fire of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion meet to call us on our way, when we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin. From the stories of our living rings a song both brave and free, calling pilgrims still to witness to the life of liberty. When the fire of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion meet to call us on our way, when we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin. From the dreams of youthful vision comes a new prophetic voice, which demands a deeper justice built by our courageous choice. When the fire of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, then our hunger and our passion need to call us on our way. When we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin.
of our chalice, but not our mission to welcome radically, love boldly, grow spiritually, and serve courageously. This we do because we envision a beloved community filled with compassion, helping all to thrive in a just world. So friends, as we go forth from our time together this morning, my hope for you is that you will plant trees you may not see, that they may bear the fruit of love. Go in peace.